Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Rodrigo Ito will defend the academic thesis, Essays on the Extended Effects of International Scientific Mobility. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Thank you. Dear Prorector, dear members of the Corona, dear supervisors, family, friends, and colleagues, and online viewers, it is with a great pleasure to finally present a brief summary of the work that I have developed over the last 5 years. As you can see from the title above me, today I'm going to talk about international scientific mobility. Mobility is quite common in science. Scientists are often moving from city to city, from country to country, and there are several reasons why they move abroad. This can be either to access knowledge or skills that are not really available in their home countries. They might want to collaborate with different colleagues. They might want to get trained abroad, or they might want to access infrastructure that might not be available in their home country. But often mobility can become a problem, especially when researchers decide to opt to remain abroad. Some say that the investment put in those researchers are not realized because they stay abroad. But on the other side, there are some scholars that says that not necessarily having researchers abroad can be harmful to the sending country. Those researchers abroad, they still can contribute to the socioeconomic development of their home countries. But this debate between brain drain, brain gain is not that simple as it seems. And in a recent publication in Science, Batista and co-authors have mentioned that more than focusing on the debate, it's important to focus on the effects of mobility on those who stay back home. So given this, I ask this following question: Can non-mobile scientists who collaborate with mobile scientists benefit from them even if they don't have an international mobility experience? To answer this question, I structured my dissertation in 6 chapters. Besides the introduction, the first chapter I focus on the network. I focus on the internationalization aspect. So I try to see if the mobile researchers help the non-mobile to connect with foreign researchers. But then at the end of this paper, we have a follow-up question that I try to see the performance. Does the collaboration with the mobile researcher also affect the performance of the non-mobile researcher? In a third paper, I shift my focus and then I decide to focus on novelty. I try to see if the collaboration leads the non-mobile researchers to explore new topics and also to produce new topics at the global level. Finally, I have a qualitative paper where I do 25 interviews to validate the findings that I have in the previous chapters and also to observe some of the mechanisms to explain my previous findings. And then I conclude this dissertation with some policy implications. Here I focus, in my dissertation, I focus in 2 countries, so Brazil and Colombia, as you can see in the blue. Those are 2 middle-income countries in Latin America. They have different levels of science technology. And even though they have different levels of science technology, both of them are far from the scientific frontier. And one way that governments in those countries try to catch up with countries at the frontier is to promote mobility schemes. In the first chapter, in my first empirical chapter called From Drains to Bridges, the Role of Internationally Mobile Scientists in Linking Non-Mobile to Foreign Scientists, this chapter has been published in the Journal of Development Economics. And as I mentioned before, I focus on the internationalization. So pretty much what I try to do here, I try to see if a mobile researcher, someone that has gone abroad to do a PhD, they help the non-mobile, those who have stayed back home, to connect with foreign scientists. To answer this question, my co-authors and I, we built this unique data set that we use 3 different data sources. So the first one is CivLac, which is this academic civil repository where I find the background and the publication list of all scientists in Colombia. We also rely on PhD scholarship lists. and then on OpenAlex to retrieve bibliometric information. We built a data set of more or less 19,000 Colombian scientists from a period between 1990 to 2021. And then here I use 3 different methods. So the first one is to define who the different types of scientists are, remembering that my unit of analysis here is the non-mobile scientists, those who have never moved abroad, and those who have always worked in the home country. And then we do some OLS. So first we do a linear probability model to estimate the probability of having a foreign co-author in function of having a collaboration with a mobile researcher. We also have some panel fixed effects models, and we also do a difference in differences to compare people that have collaboration with mobile researchers with people that do not have collaboration, and we bolster the difference in differences with a matching. We have 3 main findings in this dissertation, in this chapter. The first one is that collaborating with a mobile researcher is a way to connect with foreign scientists, but these foreign collaborations are mainly dependent on the mobile researcher. This means that as soon as I remove joint publications between the mobile and the mobile researcher, the effect disappears. And then I do some heterogeneous analysis to check the different types of mobile researcher. And what I find is that collaborating with diaspora and intermittent scientists are more likely to be associated with having more foreign collaborations than collaborating with returnees, those who have returned to the home country. In chapter 3, I focus on the performance. So I try to see if the collaboration between the mobile and the non-mobile researcher help the non-mobile researchers to improve their scientific performance. To answer this question, I use the same data set that I constructed with my co-authors for the previous paper, but then the methods that I do here, that I use, the first one, I do a matching to find a comparable group, and then on the matched sample, I use a difference in differences estimator. I also explore a bit of heterogeneity here between STEM and non-STEM scientists, and as a robustness check, I conduct the same analysis, but with a Brazilian sample. I have 3 highlights here. So the first one is that co-authoring with a foreign educated researcher, with a mobile researcher, improves the performance of the non-mobile researcher, but there is a positive reinforcement as you collaborate with more mobile researchers. And then when I try to see the differences between STEM and non-STEM, what I find is that STEM and non-STEM non-mobile researchers, they have similar level of productivity, but STEM non-mobile researchers, they have higher visibility than non-STEM. So they have higher gain citations in highly ranked publications, in the share of English publications. In chapter 4, I shift my analysis to focus on novelty, and then here I have 2 levels of novelty. So novelty at the individual level and novelty at the global level. Novelty at the individual level, I mean that something that is new to the individual, so the individual has not worked on that topic before, but it might not be new to the world, while at the global level, it's novel to the world. So a publication that is novel to the world. And then again, I use the same data set here, but then we reconstruct some of the outcomes measures. And then I also use the same methods as the previous chapter, but then the difference is here is that I do a heterogeneity analysis focusing on the different types of mobile researchers, so the returnees, the diaspora, and the intermittent. And again, I conduct the same analysis with a Brazilian sample as a robustness check. What we find here is that collaborating with a mobile researcher does not lead non-mobile researchers to explore new topics in comparison to those who have not been treated. We could not detect any effect of novelty at the global level. And then when we try to see if the effect changes depending on the type of collaborator, we see that the effect is the same. And then in chapter 5, I do a qualitative study to explain the previous results and also to find some of the mechanisms that could explain those results. But then here I will focus on the collaboration between the Brazilian scientific diaspora and researchers in Brazil. And then I focus on 6 different aspects. So the reasons, the criteria, the forms, the outcomes, the benefits, and the challenges of the collaboration. The data that I use is that I conduct 25 in-depth interviews, so 16 Brazilians that are abroad and 9 of their collaborators that are in Brazil. And then the methods that I use is the following. So the first one, I constructed a simple analytical framework to investigate the collaboration. And based on that analytical framework, I constructed my interviewed guide. And then following this analytical framework, I coded and analyzed the data. I also triangulated the answers because I had the different collaborators in my sample. And finally, I relied on thematic analysis to identify data patterns. The findings that I have in this paper are 3. So the first one, the reasons that researchers collaborate is mainly because of resources and expertise that they might not have. But one finding that I found is that Brazilians that are abroad, they want to collaborate because they want to help with the socioeconomic development of the country. And then when I try to understand why the foreign collaborations does not remain in absence of the mobile researcher, what I found is that the diaspora, they play a role of guarantor in the sense that not only they bring trust to the collaboration, but they also help the non-mobile researchers to mediate cultural and academic differences between the Brazilian academic environment and also the international environment. And one finding that I also have in this chapter is that the diaspora researchers, they facilitate the international mobility of other researchers from their home countries. So pretty much the students of their collaborators, they're often moving abroad with the help of the diaspora. So there are 3 main conclusions in my dissertation. So the first one is that the impact of mobility is not only confined to those who experience mobility, but the impact can be extended as long as there is collaboration. Having diaspora abroad is not necessarily harmful to the sending country, and fostering international scientific mobility is a way to improve the internationalization and performance of the scientific systems of the sending countries, here, Brazil and Colombia. I have 3 main policy implications in my dissertation. So the first one is that encouraging nationals to pursue a PhD abroad can improve the performance of the sending countries, but again, it's important also to improve the local scientific capacity. The second one is that there should be policies to facilitate the collaboration with mobile researchers, especially the diaspora researcher. And finally, higher education policies should also be in place because we should not only rely on international scientific mobility to promote internationalization of the country. Other policies should be there. And one of these is the higher education, in the sense that countries could promote graduate programs in English, could facilitate the mobility of foreign scientists to the country in order to promote internationalization. So I think that's what I wanted to say today. Thank you so much. And now I give the floor back to the prorector.
Thank you for your presentation. Now the opposition will be opened by Professor Mona, a professor of Maastricht University, UNU Merit, and also chair of the assessment committee. And Professor Mona is online. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, dear Rodrigo, so finally we are at the point where you can defend your dissertation. We had your thesis already a few months ago. Let me congratulate you. You have done a beautiful job in creating a very nice data set, a very rich data set that you have exploited, make 3 chapters out of it. That's very great. And I also liked your last chapter, which in a sense explains the results that you obtained in the first 3 chapters. But I'm not here just to congratulate you. I'm also to challenge you a little bit, and let me be a little bit more provocative. The second policy recommendation that you just showed us, that it's a good idea to foster mobility because it has repercussions on the non-mobile scientists in the country. But if I look at your results, I do not find that policy to be that successful if I evaluate it on the light of your results. If I look at figure 2.1 of your chapter 3, I think it is, I see that the effect is in the year in which the first publication takes place with a mobile scientist. There you see, of course, a difference that is obvious, but then afterwards it's no longer significant. If you collaborate with 3 foreign scientists, then you see something, but that is a bit normal because you have 3 chances of a publication if you want, and as it takes time to publish, it will take a few years, but basically it's just an extension of the first result. Then the second thing that you find is that afterwards, the local scientists can publish in international journals only through the intermediation of that mobile scientist. And third, you find that there is no novelty in their research. In other words, you would have expected, if there was an increase in human capital, that once they have published with a foreign scientist, they start publishing on their own and developing new ideas. But you don't find that. So if I was a Colombian or a Brazilian Minister of Education and Research, I wouldn't be very impressed by these results. What is your reaction on this?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks so much for your kind words, and thanks so much for your questions. Regarding the first point that with one collaboration we only observe the effect in the area of the treatment, I agree with you, but then in the dissertation the point that we try to emphasize is that you have to collaborate with more mobile researchers in order for you to observe a long-term effect. And of course, this is mechanical, because as you collaborate more, you have more, you have a positive effect. But that's why that's why one of the policy implications that I include in the chapter is to foster collaboration, because if there is no collaboration, there is no effect. And I know it's not ideal, but that's what I could get from the data. Regarding the second point, if I'm not wrong, that they only publish in foreign research, in foreign journals through the mobile researcher. The point about Colombia and Brazil is that those 2 countries are very much focused in their own scientific system, so they have their own journals, they have their own journals in their own language, and sometimes for them it's better to publish in those journals because the grade that the government gives to those publications are pretty much the same as they give to the grades in international journals. But then when you have a mobile researcher, they say, look, you should not focus only on your country. You should try to expand your research abroad. And then with that, your research can get more visibility. And that's what I heard from one of the interviews, is to get visibility on their research. Because those 2 countries, they are so much focused on their own scientific system that they forget that there is a world outside. Regarding the third point on the novelty, I agree with you that I could not detect any novelty at the global level. And I've been discussing this for several years, and I've been discussing especially with people that have been doing these measures, like Martina Iori, Pierre Pelletier from Strasbourg, And what they say is that, like, at the individual level, it's very hard to observe novelty that is something that is very novel at the global level. And one point that I try to emphasize also in my dissertation is that, okay, it's hard to find it's hard to do a publication that is novel to the global level, but it's also important to improve the local scientific system, because the thing is, like, it's not just a matter of sending someone abroad. If you don't have the local capacity back home, how can you expect that those researchers will do novel work? I don't think mobility is the only way for this. You have to, again, that's why I'm trying to emphasize this point in my dissertation. You have to improve the local scientific system. Mobility is a way, it's important, but it should not be the only policy that a country should rely on. I hope I answered your questions, but if you have...
Yeah, thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Professor Veugelus, professor at KU Leuven and also member of the assessment committee.
Yes, thanks a lot, Rodrigo. You studied a very important topic, mobility of scientists, which we definitely need to know more on. You also use the opportunity of the big data that we have on publications, on PhD scholarships, so you took really good advantage of that, and also by giving it a unique angle. I think particularly this focus on non-mobile researchers I really liked. But as Pierre, I also need to be a bit more provocative. If we study international mobility, we're mostly interested in the effects, and that's what you do with the treatment effect, and you try to control for selection as much as possible here, but it's a control basically here. But I really also want to understand way better the selection issue here, if only because we needed to know more about this to study the treatment effects, but I think the selection in itself is also really interesting to look at. And I was a bit disappointed that I didn't see too much on the selection here. Like in chapter 2, it's really important to know who is mobile here, and not only whether or not they become mobile, also to which countries that they would go, and particularly would they return or would they stay to. So that selection would already be important to look at here in order to understand perhaps also the different effects that you find for whether you collaborate with a returnee versus a permanent one here. And then in chapter 3, where you do this, the matching between I was actually wondering what your relevant criteria were for doing that matching. What would actually be the control group here? Because I also really want to understand better is how the matching happens between the non-mobile and the mobile researcher here. So would the non-mobile pick also have the potential to pick another mobile researcher or another international collaborator or not? And vice versa for the mobile, what other alternatives would he have to pick here? Your results really seem to identify that there is a lot of rewiring necessary by the mobile researcher here. So that's a lot of investment that the team has to make here, and then it matters also, I guess, also who they select here. And I just wanted to know whether you have more insights, and I'm sure you have from your data, on how that selection actually takes place and what important characteristics of that selection that we should be aware of.
Sure. So there are two selections in place here. The first one is to go abroad. So we don't really look at why people go abroad. But what we do in chapter 2, in the appendix that we had to work, because one of the reviewers mentioned this, is that the quality of the different types of mobile researchers. Mm-hmm. What we find is that the diaspora and the intermittent, they usually go to better universities, they usually have higher citations, they usually have more publications than the returnees. That's why the effect when you collaborate with them is larger than when you collaborate with the returnees. But that's one limitation of the thesis, is that we don't really look at the mobile researchers, because our definition is very straightforward in the sense that mobile researchers are the ones who have gone abroad to do a PhD. Some have returned, some have remained abroad, and then some keep coming back and forth. So that's how we define the different types of mobile researcher. Of course, we miss the mobile researchers who might go later. So we exclude these people from the sample. For example, you might do a PhD in Colombia, but then you decide to do a postdoc somewhere else later, and then that was not our focus. That was not my focus on the PhD dissertation. Regarding the second point on the selection of your co-authors, because of course, when you collaborate with someone, it's not random, right? There are several factors in place that might be endogenous. And what I try to do in this paper, in the third and fourth paper, I follow a paper on research policy from some people from Ireland, that they focus on star scientists. They try to see people that collaborate with star scientists with people that do not collaborate with star scientists. And then in my treated unit, both treated and control units are non-mobile researchers. But the difference is that one have collaboration and the other don't, and the other one doesn't have collaboration. And then what I try to see, I try to do the matching based on performance characteristics. For example, stock of publications, stock of citations, stock of co-authors, and also gender, field. In Colombia, master's or PhD. And also I set the first year of publication as a proxy for seniority. So that's how I did the matching. But I think it's something that I have to improve for publication to explain better the selection. But those are the two selections in place in the dissertation. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, just to clarify then, so is there indeed a selection that among the non-mobile, that there is a positive selection, that it's only the better non-mobiles that actually will be collaborating with the mobiles or not?
From the data, what I can say is that they are very similar, like both the treated and the control when I do the matching. But of course, also there are some unobservables that I cannot observe from the data. But with the matching, I try to find a similar group as much as possible. People that have, like, again, similar performance, similar citations before the first collaboration with the foreign educated researcher, with the mobile researcher.
Right, okay, thanks.
Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Dr. Pezzoni. He is from the University Côte d'Azur and also member of the assessment committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Rodrigo. I would like to congratulate for the excellent work that you have done during your thesis. And I really appreciate that you try to cover all the important aspects of related to these non-mobile scientists, like their co-authorship behavior, productivity, novelty. So it's, you know, an analysis, complete analysis encompassing many different aspects. And I also really liked that you complement all this quantitative analysis with the qualitative chapter. And indeed, my first question is about this qualitative chapter, because I think you have a kind of result in that chapter that is very, very original. Indeed, you found that mobile researchers tend to collaborate with non-mobile researchers because they have this sense of reciprocity toward the system, the education system, which give them the possibility to reach this high level of education, right? And I find this particularly interesting because different from all the reason to collaborate that has been shown in the literature, this is kind of not driven by economic incentive, right? So if you collaborate to have resources, to, I don't know, have access to a better network, etc., it's because you want to have some benefits out of it, right? But this reason is completely different. So my question is, in the light of a potential publication, etc., wouldn't be better to focus even more on this aspect that is the most original one, and you know, adapt a bit your chapter 5 for publication purposes by distinguishing this new reason to collaborate that you basically discover, right, in your thesis? Because to the best of my knowledge, I didn't see it in the literature.
Dear esteemed opponent, thanks so much for your kind words. Yes, indeed, I find that researchers that they remain abroad, because many of them they have gone through public universities in Brazil. They have the sense of obligation towards the country because public money was invested in them for their formation. And yes, it's a novel aspect of the chapter that they want to collaborate with the country because they have this sense of reciprocity. And I think, yes, I should pay more attention to this aspect, because when I did this chapter, I was more or less like trying to focus on different aspects, and of course, at some point it became too big. But then I think one point that I should focus on this chapter is to focus on this aspect that you mentioned. And today I was talking to Anna, my supervisor, that we should get this paper published as soon as possible. But yes, I agree with you that I should change, I should focus on these results because it moves away from the economic perspective that is mainly observed in the literature. But thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, the opposition will be continued by Dr. Bin from the University of Campina and also a member of the assessment committee, and she's online. The floor is yours.
Hi. I would like to thank you very much for the invitation to serve on this examination committee. It's a pleasure to take part on this evaluation, and I would like to begin congratulating Rodrigo for this very strong and thoughtful piece of work. I like very much to read it. And my question, Rodrigo, is a more general one. So in the chapter 1, you argue that training and mobility abroad are essential part for promoting socioeconomic development in emerging economies because they strengthen research capacity, they enable access to or absorption of new knowledge that may contribute to the development of the country of origin. Mm-hmm. And your empirical focus was the effects of mobility on the non-mobile scientists. So you are trying to connect this, the effects of mobility on non-mobile scientists with this more broad issue of socio-economic development. So my question is whether your findings allow you to speak more directly to this broader development perspective introduced in the chapter, because based on the evidence you present, you can say that you have like changes in the collaboration, you have changes in the performance, but not in novelty. That's the point of the chapter 4, the chapter 3, or 4, I don't remember now. So, do you feel able to draw conclusions about this contribution of scientific mobility to development in emerging economies? So I would like to hear from you about this connection, because you began the dissertation with this point. And I would like to hear now, after doing all the research, how can you see this connection?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks so much for your kind words. And thank you so much for your question. Regarding the development aspect, I mainly focus on it in chapter 2 that was published in the Journal of Development Economics. And the story that we tried to create there is that mobile researchers, they they help the non-mobile to connect with foreign researchers, and then there was a bit of absorptive capacity there. So that was the first point that I want to use to answer your question. Of course, chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4, I focus more at the aspect at the individual level. So how can non-mobile researchers become more productive? How can they produce more novel knowledge? With these two chapters, I don't really try to claim that development is happening in place, but what we're trying to do now for future work, we decided not only to focus, so one idea for future work is to focus on the local knowledge production to see if the collaboration between the mobile and the non-mobile researcher can help address questions that are important to the country. So can this collaboration help the country to tackle some important issues, like, let me say, Chagas disease, for example? In the follow-up work, what we're also trying to do, instead of looking at the science aspect, now we want to look at the innovation aspect. So we want to see if these mobile researchers are also contributing to different levels of innovation in the country. And I believe that with this follow-up work that we're going to start, we then can close the whole story and say, look, they can also contribute to the socioeconomic development of the country. So those are the different aspects that I can say about how the mobile researcher can contribute to the socioeconomic development. Because of course, I mean, I focus much more on science, but then there are some aspects that I can grasp from the dissertation, say, yes, they collaborate to the development.
The opposition will be continued by Dr. Assadki from Maastricht University, Union Merit.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear Rodrigo, I first would like to congratulate you, same as the rest of the colleagues, on the quality of your work, particularly the effort involved in constructing the data set and your contribution that you made to the economics of science. Before I go into introducing my question, I would like one of your paronyms to read out proposition number 4.
The research interests of non-mobile researchers become more focused after collaborating with foreign educated researchers.
Thank you. So I have a question on this aspect of focus, and particularly on the pivot index, is the way you've introduced it in chapter 4. And the way you describe it and explain it in the thesis that you construct it as 1 minus the cosine similarity between the topic distribution of a focal paper and the researcher's prior topic distribution. And well, I'm not so convinced that this is really measuring a pivot, as in a change in direction. The original pivot measure that you draw upon by Hill was designed to capture directional shifts from the COVID research, moving into COVID research using reference list. So in your adaptation, you use topic distributions. And to me, it seems more that it captures general deviation in topic space rather than a directional shift. And so capturing a continuous distance in topic space. And I would like you to reflect on that, whether you agree with this or not. And so to me, it seems more like a dispersion measure rather than a discrete shift. But I was still curious about this measure, and particularly the high level found in your data set, because I noticed that the baseline level of, okay, I keep the word pivot index, is already quite high, right? Around 0.8 for both the treated and the control groups. Well, that suggests that even before treated, most papers are already quite distant from prior work, right? So I was then wondering, how should we interpret variation in such a compressed upper high-dimensional topic space, and whether this actually reflects differences in research behavior, or whether it reflects the properties of the topic space, the high dimensionality. So my question is, how confident are you that pivot actually captures research direction? And secondly, how should we interpret these effects given the high baseline level?
Esteemed opponent, thanks so much for your question. It's a valid point, but I have two measures at the individual level. So the share of publications with new topics and pivot. I mean, my main outcome variable is the share. So what I observe with the share is that as they collaborate with more foreign indicator researcher, it seems that it's not that they're not exploring new topics, but they're reducing the scope of the topics that they are exploring in comparison to the control group. But then I rerun the analysis with the pivot measure that is done by Ryan Hill in a paper regarding COVID. Of course, there are some differences, but the idea is more or less the same, and we find a similar effect. So the way I interpret this result is that it's not that they are, yes, exploring new topics, but it seems that in comparison to the control group, they're not going much further. And of course, I agree with you that like the variables are already high prior to treatment, so there is a lower bound. But that's what I mean, with the results that I have, I mean, those results are too consistent. I mean, they are consistent using the two outcome variables.
Mm-hmm. Well, so thank you very much for that answer. Can I follow up, Prorector? So I see this indeed. So you refer in your conclusions as well, you refer to the work of Jones, right? That these results align with the idea of the burden of knowledge, right? With an increasing knowledge stock, researchers opt to specialize, and then they join teams to produce novel knowledge. So yeah, in that sense, I understand what you're saying, but I was just still puzzled by this finding, and perhaps you could reflect on since you look at these two measures of novelty at the individual level, one the share of publications and one the pivot index. One could also hypothetically think about it as that one moves into a different direction than the other one, so that they diverge. So if they diverge, so they are doing more topical distribution, so they're doing more different topics. But on the other hand, it's something new. How can we then still, let's say, make inferences about novelty? How do you then, let's say, reflect on that?
Let me just think a bit, because so okay, I will cite a work that I just watched a couple of weeks ago when I was in Budapest. Someone is doing a similar work as us, and they use large language models. Instead of using these measures, they use an LLM, I think it's BERT, and they find very similar results as us. What they observe is that collaborating with returnees after postdoc leads the non-mobile researchers to explore fewer topics in comparison to the control group. Mm-hmm. But I have to think it's true, because this particular chapter is the least developed, and we still have to work a bit more on the findings. But I will take it in consideration, and then I will think through about this. But thanks so much for your question.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have a second round, so you're not done yet. And we're going to shuffle a little bit the order, and I want to give the floor to Dr. Pezzoni.
Okay, so I start this second round of questions. So my question is about the mechanism that you explain may drive your results, right? And I read the thesis, and in each chapter you present, you highlight more some than others, some of these mechanisms more than others. For instance, you talk about access to networks, development of human capital, the access to relevant knowledge, visibility, etc. And as I said, in each chapter, you seem to put forward one of these mechanisms. For instance, in your network chapter, as you call it, it's more the access to networks through mobile scientists. In the chapter of novelty, is more the access to knowledge that is far from the one of the non-mobile scientists. So I was wondering if you think that one of these mechanisms is more important than others, because, for instance, your results on novelty are showing us that probably the access to knowledge that is far from the one of the mobile researcher is less relevant than access to network, right? Because you don't find a very strong result when it comes to novelty. So I was wondering if you can tell us what is your feeling about it? Is there a mechanism that is prevailing over the others?
I don't put this in this dissertation, but we try to compare the collaboration between different types of mobile researcher. And what I do, I differentiate between highly educated research, super productive researchers with least productive researchers. In the case of Colombia, the results were not that different. But in the case of Brazil, what we see is that when you collaborate with more highly productive mobile researchers, of course, you experience a higher effect. So I imagine, in the case of Brazil, I imagine that when you collaborate with someone that's super productive, of course, there is the signaling effect. Of course, you benefit from collaborating with that researcher. But in the case of Colombia, I couldn't really detect any difference. And it's hard for me to say which mechanisms goes above the other.
Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, the opposition will be continued by Professor Virgeles.
I would also like to ask you another question, but first of all, it also struck me since you are yourself a Brazilian diaspora, it would be really interesting to know how you and your story fits into your data analysis here and what that would predict in terms of future research and collaborative partners we can expect from you, but that's for during the reception. My question is, so labor mobility is something that's currently in decline here, international mobility in general, but also for science in particular here. So in these difficult geopolitical times that we are living, what would your analysis teach us in terms of what the effects would be of that drop in scientific mobility here? What could we expect? And also, on the more optimistic side, is there anything we could learn from your results in terms of which kind of forms of scientific mobility, international mobility, would be more resilient to these geopolitical shocks here, so that we could better survive what's going on here? Is there any insights you can bring for the policy discussion on these, on how we could become more resilient for the geopolitical drop in mobility?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks so much for your question. Regarding the first point, mobility is important because, as we know, having diversity and collaboration is super important in order to produce novel knowledge. As we know that like top universities here in the US or in Europe, we can look in this room, we have so many foreigners and we together produce a decent quality, a high quality of knowledge. And it's important to have these different sources of knowledge in order to produce good science. And of course, with the current political shocks that are happening in the world, with countries like the US putting high fees to sponsor visas or going after scholars, this can have a negative impact on this country and on these countries. And there are already some studies from American scholars showing that what the US is currently doing is going to bring negative impact towards the country. Regarding the policy implications, what I can say is that having these researchers moving abroad, even if they return, it's already a way to connect with foreign scientists. So those people, they act as knowledge, as gatekeepers between the sending country and the host country. And even if they are not abroad anymore, even if they have to return, the trust has already been built through the mobile researcher. And trying to foster this collaboration, even if it's online, you already have the trust that is necessary for science to happen. So even what's happening right now in the world, that they're trying to undermine foreigners of coming towards some countries, I think what we have built in the past can help to navigate this current moment that we're going through right now. And I'm very hopeful that things will change and then people can start moving again without having certain barriers that countries are putting right now.
Yep, that's a positive message. I like to hear that. Thanks.
The opposition will be continued by the chair of the committee, Professor Mone.
Yes. Rodrigo, let me get back to my previous point and let me drill you a little bit further on this. After reading your last chapter, I was under the impression that your results would be consistent with the following story. Suppose you get your PhD and you get an offer of a very nice position in a European university, and you stay in Europe for 10 years. And then in 10 years, you have an idea of a research topic. You know that there are these innovation survey data, very good data in Brazil. But boy, it's so difficult to get access to these data. I would have to go to Rio de Janeiro. You have to work on site. I cannot do that. I'm going to ask a colleague in Brazil. Maybe they have a good PhD student that I could hire to do this job. And I would work with the student and he would get a publication out of this. Isn't that a little bit what's going to happen and why? And then, of course, you are going to help this student. In that sense, you are going to transfer knowledge back to Brazil. But this student, basically staying in Brazil, will have no other connections with outside world except through you. And that's why he's going to publish with you, maybe 1 or 2 papers, and that's it. Isn't that a little bit the story of what's going to happen here? It's not so much a transmission of knowledge, I would say, as a way to solve problems in getting access to money, to data, and so on. So it's connection rather than transfer of knowledge. What do you think?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks so much for your question. I hope I will answer well because it's quite hard to hear here. Regarding your point that, yes, sometimes you need someone to access the data there, and then you hire a PhD student to collect data for you, and then you work with that person. What I would try to do in my perspective, and that's what I did in my PhD, I not only had supervisors from one country, I also had my supervisor from Brazil, which was a way to connect the two systems. So if I were to have a PhD student in the future, to help this person collaborate, to help this person contribute to the scientific development of Brazil, I'll try to get on board researchers in the country that also have that could also have a better knowledge of, for example, as you mentioned, the Community Innovation Survey in Brazil. So I think that's one way to tackle this. And of course, there are other ways that you can try to disseminate this knowledge, not only like through collaborating, but then you could also incentivize the students to present his or her work in the country or collaborate with the government. That's what, I mean, at least in my PhD, that's what we tried to do. We tried to work on something that could benefit both Brazil and Colombia. And I think that's one way out to tackle your point. I hope I answered correctly because it was very hard to hear here.
Oh, sorry. No, that's fine. Thank you.
For the next opposition, I'm looking at whether Dr. Bin has another question.
Yes, I have another question, and I'm trying to have a more applied question now. So regarding that Rodrigo is a Brazilian, and I don't know what are his plans and if he's intent to come back. But my applied question is that suppose you are asked to design and manage research mobility initiatives in a developing country, Brazil, for instance, on another similar context, with a particular focus on monitoring and evaluation. So having in mind your dissertation and other things that you read during your PhD, what are the key indicators that you consider essential to track over time and for which groups? Would you focus more on the direct beneficiaries or also include the non-mobile scientists? And beyond individual trajectories, how to measure broader effects to the scientific community? So it's kind of not really based on your PhD thesis, but it's a more general and applied question.
Esteemed opponent, thanks so much for your question. If I were to design a policy, I would focus, of course, on two different aspects. As I mentioned before, the first one, I would focus on the scientific aspect. So some of the measures that I would try to look at would be, of course, the very traditional ones, like number of publications, citations, publications in top journals, but also I would try to also check if the language pattern is changing. I also would try to use different novelty measures, like the one from Renew, the on English publications that we tried, but it was quite hard to do it. And I would focus on the innovation aspect as well.
You can briefly finish your sentence and then...
And then I would also focus on the innovation aspect, and that's what we are planning to do now, because I think there is room to focus on how the mobile researchers can contribute to the innovation of firms. Thanks so much.
Rodrigo Ito, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
Please all rise.
Thank you for everything. I don't have it.
Please be seated.
Rodrigo Ito, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Cohen is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite you, your supervisor, to now take the floor in the classroom.
Please all rise.
Rodrigo, in the last few years, I've asked you many questions, none of which mattered. This is the only one that matters, and if you get the answer wrong, we're in big trouble. So think carefully before you answer. Rodrigo, do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
10 out of 10. By the authority vested in us by law, and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Rodrigo Ito, the degree of doctor, and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
Thanks so much, Robin.
Please be seated.
Dr. Ito, I like saying that. I get to be the first person to do it. It's a very gratifying moment. But I have to start this laudatio with a confession, which is that 5 years ago or so, I worried about whether or not we would get here. Don't worry, it's nothing to do with you. I knew that you had what it takes. You're smart enough. You had the perseverance. We all know that perseverance is more important than being smart. I was worried about your supervisor. A big aspect of succeeding in a PhD is the relationship between supervisor and student. And if that goes wrong, if that goes well, usually the thing progresses and the student finishes. If that goes wrong, this can be big trouble. So one of the things that, as a program director, one worries about is whether or not these relationships are going to work. I didn't know you, of course, and at that point I didn't really know Fabiana very well either. So how was I going to figure this out, whether this was a good idea or not? I knew almost nothing. What do you do when you know almost nothing? Well, you ask the stars. I knew your birth dates, so I asked the stars. And what they told me was that Gemini and Virgo are a bad combination. So, what do you do when you see a bad combination coming? A standard solution is to put a buffer in between. So who could I use as a buffer? Well, given the topic and the situation and all that, I was an obvious choice to be the buffer. Okay, I'll step in and this will smooth things out. Bad plan. We don't fit either. Let me read you what I read, what I learned about you and Fabiana first. Communication between you is likely to be difficult. There will be many arguments and battles of will. Fabiana often gets the feeling that Rodrigo ignores her opinion or her way of seeing things, and that Rodrigo insists on imposing his will. The reason may be that Rodrigo finds Fabiana's ideas inconsistent or evasive, or even that Rodrigo finds them threatening to his way of being. What did I learn about you and me? Well, communication between you tends to be problematic, as on many occasions you're talking and talking, moving as if in a circle. Sound familiar? Rodrigo may feel that Robin doesn't give him enough support, and that Robin puts too much pressure on him by ignoring his desires. Rodrigo has the feeling that Robin's attitude is limiting and hinders progress. It would not be strange if Rodrigo sees Robin as a dark force that threatens his integrity. This doesn't sound like a very promising beginning. So, what am I going to do about this? Well, what do empirical economists do when they run an analysis and they don't like the results? They change the model. They get different data. They introduce some new variables. So that's what I did. So it turns out, as I'm sure you know, that to get a proper astronomical reading, you need a lot of information, not just the birthdays, but the location and the time of day and the gender and all kinds of other stuff. I didn't have all of it, but I had some. So I put in more variables and ran the analysis again. And this is what I got that time. Fabiana appreciates Rodrigo's mentality. Rodrigo appreciates that Fabiana's experience, and I'm not making this up, by the way. I really did this. Rodrigo appreciates that Fabiana's experience and discipline can be of great help to him in improving his intellectual ability and productivity. In fact, the two could make an excellent team in connection with any activity that requires concentration or organization. For example, science, mathematics, engineering. Often, Rodrigo's brilliant ideas and Fabiana's analytical skills will help you work more effectively and successfully. And about me? Robin and Rodrigo stimulate each other's intellect. The flowing exchange of knowledge is very conducive to carrying out any task. A professional collaboration in science, literature, education could be very effective and promise certain success. And I really like the next bit. Robin is a real powerhouse. So I've gone from a dark force to a powerhouse. This is the kind of new analysis that is really effective. Robin is a real powerhouse and a booster for Rodrigo's ideas and skills. Well, this sounds a lot more promising. So I relaxed a bit, and here we are. The more detailed analysis seems to have been the right one, a lot more relevant, and this collaboration, which I must admit is driven mostly by your own hard work, has brought us to this happy place. Of course, a journey like this is not only about your relationship with us, it's about a lot of different relationships, many of which I see sitting in the audience, particularly with your classmates and colleagues. And as I always do when I'm doing a laudatio, is that I ask the classmates, is there anything that I should include? And several of them answered, and I will give you only some of what they've told me. I don't know if you've seen Rodrigo's book, but if you look at the cover, it doesn't actually look like it's a PhD thesis cover. What it looks like is it's a travel guide. Rodrigo spent took advantage of a lot of opportunities to visit various places during the course of his career, disguising them as conference attendants. And what one of your colleagues said about this was, Rodrigo always makes time to visit specific parts of the city or do some touristic activities, while most of us do not use that free time effectively and go straight to drinking. I won't tell you who said that. Second thing that they said, and I'm just going to read this quotation again, I can only emphasize what a genuinely kind and loyal friend Rodrigo is to all of us. Always supportive and maybe even too humble about his own achievements during the PhD. And this one I like. This one was written to me, so I'm the you in this. I clearly remember before the exams of yours and Anders' course. I couldn't study one part of the course, and he explained to me something in 10 minutes before the exam. I got full marks on that part. You know who that was. And finally, you're famous for some behavioral idiosyncrasies. You're from Brazil, but you hate the sun. You're from Brazil, but you don't drink coffee or eat chocolate or drink. These idiosyncrasies are so embedded in your behavior that you now have a big reputation, particularly the Café Cocotte. And in honor of that reputation, Fabiana and I would like to present you with Mr. Mint. So Rodrigo, it's been five and a half years, something like that. You and your class started at one of the most difficult times in the height of COVID. Courses were online and offline. The institute was open and closed. Communication was difficult. Movement was impossible. This was tough. But through it all, you remained very cheerful and positive, always moving forward and always keeping your eyes on the goal. I speak also for Fabiana when I say that working with you on this project has been a real pleasure. We've appreciated your approach to things and your ability to keep looking ahead, even as you encountered the various bumps in the road. So, from both of us, thank you for making this a very nice and, for the most part, easy supervision. Before I close, one more astrological observation. For someone born on your birth date, Rodrigo, 2026, a year of powerful shifts and personal triumphs. I'm not making this up either. In 2026, your career takes center stage. You'll have the drive to push for that promotion or make significant leap in your professional journey. Expect some workplace challenges that will test your mettle, but also provide you with opportunities to showcase your skills and resilience. This is the time to take the initiative and create the career you desire. And one more thing from one of your classmates. I remember once during our first year, in the peak of COVID, right before we had our collective cohort breakdown, when the two of us were the only ones in the building and we were leaving at late 10 p.m., following Mark's one-direction route, when Rodrigo looked around and he said to me, "It feels like a dream coming true being here." Well, Rodrigo, I hope you feel that today marks that part of the dream coming true, coming to fruition. But as part of that, do remember that you've made many friends and colleagues, and that those friendships and those collegial relationships will extend long beyond this chapter of your dream. We wish you all the best in the next chapters, beginning soon in Copenhagen. Congratulations, Rodrigo. Good luck and Godspeed.
Dear Dr. Ito, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have just acquired. I'm about to close the session. I will ask the audience to wait for us to leave with the new doctor, and then the reception will take place in the refter, so please move to the refter before we can start making a picture first. I hereby close the session.
I don't know, yeah, okay, maybe.
Normally, yes. Normally there